Hello, in this session, we will try to test the new Microsoft TEAP protocol. To test this one, we will have the ClearPass running on version 6.9.3, latest version we have until today. And on Aruba Wi-Fi, we will use the version 8.6.0.6. In fact, the Microsoft TEAP, the new protocol TEAP is supported in ClearPass 6.9.x. And we will have one client, which is this one. This is a Windows client running Windows latest Windows 10, and it's already support the protocol TEAP, right? So let me show you the detailed version of this window. Okay, OS build info. So this is the one. OS build is version is 2004 and OS build is 19041.610. Okay. All right. So let's try and test the user experience when we test with the new EAP protocol TEAP, right? But first of all, right, what is a TPAP? TEAP, right? So TP is a new protocol that's supported on the first Windows 10 latest version, and the TEAP come out to address one of the limitation we have in the other EAP protocol. So TEAP support both user and machine in one EAP transaction. It means that now if we use a TEAP, we can authenticate both the user auth and machine auth at the same time for the Windows machine, right? In the older method, we can only choose either machine auth or user auth, right? Or sometimes we can choose machine auth first and then followed by user auth. But those will belong to two separate EAP session, right? So let's take a look at new TAP, right? First of all, let's connect to this SSID that I already configured to support the TAP. So let's do the right click, choose the status and choose the wireless property. So when you come to here, you can go to security to change the settings. As you can see from here, down here I choose a new protocol called EAP-TEAP, Tunnel EAP, right? And under the setting, after one setting, I choose a user or computer authentication, right? And under the setting, first of all, I just uncheck this one, right? And as you can see from here, we have the client authentication where we have the primary EAP method and secondary EAP method. So both method, right? I tick, I choose automatically use my Windows logon name and password. So basically, the primary EAP method it is a machine authentication. So when I choose this one, it means that it will use the machine ID, the computer ID for authentication because of the protocol I use is EAP MHF v2. So beside this method, right, you also can use a cert-based authentication. All right, same for the user auth as a secondary method. I also choose a EAP MHF v2. It means that it will use the default logon username, right, account for authentication. Okay, so let's try to connect to the Wi-Fi to see what happened. Okay, connect, continue. All right, now it is connected and we can check the status from here. It have the IP address and now this one, right? Let's say you go to arubanetworks.com. We have the internet access, right? Now let's take a look at the ClearPass to see what happened. Now from the ClearPass, right? As you can see from here, we received the request. So let me do the filtering. So I just want to filter the request coming from this particular MAC address, which is this machine, right? And if you notice here, I've done something, the configuration. Now, I use a row mapping to check if the client, right, or the Windows machine, it passed the machine out, or it passed the user out, or it passed both. So if it passed the machine out, I will assign the the row or the label called TAP machine out. If it passed user out, right, and then I will assign this label called TAP user out. But if the user part pass both machine out and user out, then it will have both label, as you can see from here, right? And based on my configure policy, if it's passed both label, then I will return the row called TAP user machine out. Right. And at the same time, I also return the user out username. So this one is to return to the Wi-Fi controller so that the controller will show the username instead of anonymous, which is by default. Right. If you take a look at the input, look at the compute attribute, right? And we will understand why it have both row, both this row, tip machine org and tip user org. That's because of under this one, if you notice, right, we have the method one, which is machine org, is succeed, right? And method two also succeed. So that's the reason why it, based on the row mapping, it have both row. And because it have both row under my configure policy, I return this enforcement profile with the Aruba user row and the username, right? So let's take a look at the controller. So when you go to controller, go to the user, you will see this is a user, right? This is my address D030 D030. So it's as you can see from here, right? This one D030. So this is a machine, and if you notice from here, it gets this row, right? Now, so I already explained why this machine, when it get authenticated, it get this row, right? Because it's passed both user and machine out in the single EAP authentication, which is we use a tip. Now let's try to modify some setting on this machine, so that it only pass the so-called machine out and it's fail the user out. So what will happen, right? So to do that, we go to wireless property, security, under setting here, right? So as I mentioned, right, the primary if method will be the machine org, and secondary if method will be the user org. So from here, I go to config, I uncheck this one, click OK. Okay. So now when I log in again, it will ask me to key in the user account. I mean the username for the secondary method. So I will do connect, right? So this is the username it asks for, right? I say test 123 anything. I purposely enter the wrong one. So when I enter the wrong one, if as you notice, right, I still get connected to the Wi-Fi, right? And if I try, I still can access to internet, right? So what happened? How can I how I should be able to access to internet even I fail the user out, but I only pass the machine out. So to answer this one, let's take a look at the ClearPass. So this is the asset tracker we see, right? So let's take a look at the row. So we don't need to to pay attention for this one. This is a default row, so we will not use this one in our policy. What we use is this one. So as you can see from here, right, because this one failed user out, so it so based on my configured row mapping, it's only have the machine out row, and because of it have the machine out row, the output, I mean the policy based on my configured policy, I only return the machine out row to the controller to assign this user to this row, and of course the username is still it is based on the user org. So if you take a look at the input compute attribute, right? If you take a look at closer to the result, right? If you notice here, The method one, which is the machine auth, is succeed, right? And of course, because this is the joint domain machine, and it's it use the machine ID to authenticate against the ClearPass, and the ClearPass it's already joint domain. It will authenticate against the ID, and it's succeed, right? Succeed because it's pass authentication. But if you look at the method two, which is a user authentication, it fail, right? Because this username is not, is not right. It's wrong. User and password in the ID. I don't have this one in the ID, so that's why it fail. Okay, and so we take a look at the controller also. If you go to the controller and you go to the user, I mean to the client, refresh this one. Now you see this. We see the test user 123, which is we enter in, but the role now is a machine auth instead of user and machine auth, right? So this is how we can do some modification, right? And based on the result of the authentication, it pass the machine or the user or both machine and the user, then you can return a row for the enforcement. So you can say that the user have only full access if they pass both user and machine auth. If user only pass machine auth, right, you only allow access restriction. For example, allow the machine to go to to access to AD, right, or access some restricted some resources only. So this is possible if we use a TEAP, right? Now let's take a look at the configure policy from the ClearPass. All right, so the service, if you notice, right, the service it hit is a generic AO2.1x wired wireless AUX. So the service is this one. This is service, right? And under this service, right, basically I just match any, right? It means that if it's .1x authentication, either wired and Wi-Fi, it will match this service. And under the authentication, now I created this new method. You can create this one under here, under authentication, under method. Then from here you can go to add, and you can find the new method is here, so you can name it. So you notice, right, the username in access tracker. So I choose method 2. It means that it will use a user. It will use a username from user auth to show in the access tracker, right? But actually, I not really leverage much on this one because of I will use. I mean, I will not leverage on this one to return to controller, but instead I will use, I will return the IETF username. So let me show you in my configure policy, right? So authentication, as you can see from here, this is what I configured, right? So I choose a username in access tracker. It will show you my method 2, which is a user auth catch. Inner method, right? I choose amateur p2, right? But if you, let's say, if you want to use cert based, then you can add in the EAP-TEAP. Under authorization, I authorize against the AD, right? So this is the AD, right? Because I want to pull some attribute from it. In fact, I don't use in my policy, but I just want to show to you that after you do authentication, and you can query to the AD and to get authorization, and then you can use that um, in your policy. For example, you can say that if the user belong to particular AD group, then you can do something, right? Now this is important. So the role mapping is something that I leverage on to check if the user passed the machine auth or pass the user auth, or it's pass both. So if the user is if they pass the machine auth, right, then I will assign the role, assign a label to it, is called tip machine auth. If it pass the user auth, then I will assign the label called tip user auth, right? And under enforcement, I just define the policy say that if the user have passed both user auth and machine auth, right? Then I will give this row. Right? I will return this. I will use this enforcement profile to return. Right? The row Aruba Wi-Fi. This one is means that if you notice from here, right? I mean, if I receive the request come from Aruba Wi-Fi, regardless of the SSID, then I will give it the, Aruba Wi-Fi role. I do this because of I use the same service for the wired authentication also. So I don't want, the wired authentication it hit this policy, right? So this is what I do. And if the ClearPass receive authentication come from Aruba Wi-Fi, and the user use a TAP with the user and pass the user out only, as I return this row. I mean this enforcement profile. And if they pass machine out only, then I return this enforcement profile, right? So let's take a look at what are the setting I configure under this enforcement profile. You go to here, profile, right? Filter for tip. Now this is a this is a enforcement profile I will return when the user pass both user and machine out, right? This is the row I return to the controller, and this is a username. So this is important. If you don't return this one, right? Under the Wi-Fi, I mean under the controller, it will show it anonymous, right? But if you want to show to the user, I mean under for the Wi-Fi, the controller, or under the airwave, you want to show the real username, then you should return this one to the controller, right? And some same for machine org, right? I just return this row called tip machine org, and same for user org, right? Just simple like that. And you may ask me that under the row mapping, where can I get this tip? So basically, I just define the row under here, tip, right? So this is what I do, right? I just create this row under the identity, right? And then I can use one under the row mapping, which is from here. Yep, it's here. Okay, so please take note that this row you see from here, right? Tip machine org, tip user org, it is local significant to the ClearPass. It acts as a label, right? So that you can leverage on the one under the role mapping, and you use the role mapping under your enforcement policy. Okay. Now, one thing I also want to show you here is that I also found out that, right, if you use, let me go here, if you if you don't use the authentication mode is user or computer org, if you use the user org, it still work, right? So let's try this one out. All right, connect to this one and see what happened. Oh, sorry, this one. Hang on. Let me switch that to. All right. So this is the thing on the Windows 10, right? If you want to modify the setting security for SSID, you have to connect first, right? So I just key in anything. Once you connect, right, you right click, you choose status, then you can see the wireless properties from here. Then you can go here to change the setting. Okay, I go to here setting, method 2, click choose this one. Now this one, because of this, my client is already join my join domain, right? So I can use this way. Okay, so let's try again. Connect. You notice that now, right? I am doing. Let me see. Let me try to connect to this. Right. I am doing the user org. Okay. So when I do the user org, right, it is to work. Let's find out and let's see the outcome. You see here, user org, right? So go to ClearPass, check access tracker. This is the wrong one. We just key in. This is the working one, correct one. So we choose the user org, right? But we check the compute attribute from here. It still pass both, method one succeed, method two succeed, right? And we still can let's see, authorization, right? We still can so-called query the ID, right? So basically the attribute we query from here, let me see, right? Okay, so from here, member of, right? So you notice, right, what we query from here is it use, right? So basically it use the user ID to query, right? So we see the username from here, okay? So it's a user DN. It means you can leverage on this attribute for your, in your policy to do something. For example, you can say that you can use this one and say that if a member of right contain for example contain remote desktop, for example, right, then you assign a role, then under that role you can do something, and then you use on in the enforcement policy, right? So now let's try this, right? Let's try the computer out to see what will happen. Okay. Okay. Now if we try the computer out and we try to connect again, what will happen? Connected, we still can access to internet without any issue, right? Aruba network, Google, Yahoo, right? No issue. But what will happen? First of all, from asset tracker, right? You see the username is blank. Why is blank? It's because of, remember when we configure the policy authentication, right? We choose we choose the username in access tracker. We choose method 2, which is a user auth. It will get the user auth to show. But when we do this one, right? Let's take a look at this one. So because of the method we choose is a machine auth, so it do not send the user auth information for the ClearPass. It means it don't do the user authentication. So that's why the user auth, which is method 2, fail, and username is field is blank. So that's why we see it's blank, right? But we still see that the machine auth is successfully. So it means if you choose machine auth, even you use TAP, the only method one is applicable, which is successful. And because of that, right, under the row mapping, it get only this row. And because we get only this row output, I only return this one, right? This enforcement profile. But of course, the radius your IETF, the username is blank because of why? Because I use this one to return, but now it's blank, so that's why it's blank, right? But anyway, the user still can access the internet. But now let's take a look at the controller to see what happened. Now from the controller, you notice here, right? Now the username it will show anonymous. So it means that if you use TAP and when you return, and if you don't return the username in the IETF username attribute, the controller will just show anonymous, right? So this is a catch that we need to take note. All right. Okay, let's try one more time the scenario. Let's try this one back to user or computer authentication. We just turn on this option, right? See what happened. Connect. Okay, connected. And now it is trying to authenticate, right? And let's see if we still can access internet. arubanetwork.com. Yes, yes, no issue. And check the ClearPass access tracker to see what happened. Okay, now we see the username ID, right? And we see we have both row. So it means this one both, it passed both user and machine auth, right? We can validate from here. Method 1 succeed. Method 2 succeed. So it passed both, right? And if we check under authorization to see what happening. Now, if we check the authorization, it still use user ID for authorization. Okay, so this one of the very um, good use case when customer asks for both the machine and user auth, and they want to use the you know the user ID in the user auth to query the ID to get additional for additional attribute, right, in the enforcement profile, right? So this so the thing, right? And we can check at the Wi-Fi also. If we check the Wi-Fi, it should show this one. Yeah, it show the user and machine auth. Of course, to make sure that the user get assigned to this role, right, under the controller, the Wi-Fi, you need to configure you have to define those roles. So those roles I already configured and it's under here. See tip user auth, tip machine auth, and tip user and machine auth should be here. Yeah. And under my configuration, I just create this three row And the policy are the same. I just simply allow all. But of course, if you want to differentiate the access level among these row, you can always define the policy from here. All right. So, and that's all. And thank you for your watching.